I guess we'll go ahead and talk about Jonah Williams because I cannot wait till he leaves Cincinnati. When you look at Orlando Brown and you look at Jonah Williams, all the offseason this past year, I would not shut up about Jonah Williams. He sucks. He's not nearly as good as people thought. People need to start, talking, more bad about him for a guy who was a first-round pick who was not remotely close lived up to his first-round pick back in 2019. Jonah Williams this past season gave up 13 sacks. The last 5 seasons, Orlando Browns gave up 14 sacks. Orlando Brown gave up only one more sack in 5 seasons than Jonah Williams did all of this last season. It's absolutely crazy that Orlando Brown's getting less than $4 million per year than what Jonah Williams is getting this year. This is a significant upgrade. And when you look at Jonah Williams, when you look at the Bengals signing Orlando Brown, it's interesting because I feel like this kind of could be said. Maybe the reason why Orlando Brown did not get paid as much is because he's strictly only going to play left tackle. He's made it, public and open that he does not want to play right tackle. He's only going to play left tackle. Maybe that's why Orlando Brown did not get paid as much money. But, that helped the Bengals because Orlando Brown did not get paid as much. But also, when you look at Jonah Williams, that also hurts the Bengals because Jonah Williams, with them signing Orlando Brown, the intention was Jonah Williams is going to play right tackle until Leo Collins comes back. He's pretty much been known he has no intention to play right tackle. But when you look at Jonah Williams, if he's only going to play left tackle, that hurts the Bengals' trade value because if he was open to play right tackle and he already plays left tackle, that brings a higher trade value because he's versatile. He can play multiple positions. But the fact that he's pretty much strictly staying at left tackle kind of hurts the Bengals' trade opportunities there. But we're talking about a guy who's making $12.4 million this upcoming season. He is a bust. He's played freaking terrible the last 2 years. The last 2 years, he's gave up 23 sacks. There's no excuses for him. At some point, people need to start realizing he's been really, really bad the past couple of years. The Bengals should move on from him. But realistically, the Bengals should move on from him. But realistically, if the Bengals are not offered a day 2 pick, a second or third round pick, I don't think the Bengals are going to move on from Jonah Williams. Let's think about this for a second. When you look at the Bengals, they do not often trade their own players for draft picks. Back in the rebuilding stages of 2018, 19, around that time frame, the Bengals had such a prime opportunity to get so many draft picks in return for guys like Andy Dalton, A.J. Green, Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlap. They traded Dunlap, but they got pocket change for him. If they traded him a year or two before, they would have got so much more in return. Multiple other players, guys like Tyler Eifert around that time frame who had expiring contracts that year. The Bengals are not used to trading their players for draft picks. I would love it if the Bengals were able to trade Jonah Williams for anything because that frees up $12.4 million. And as of yesterday, if they were to trade Jonah Williams, that would make them second highest in cap space in the NFL. A team who just signed Orlando Brown, who just signed a decent safety in Nick Scott, a team who's been in the AFC Championship game the last 2 seasons, and then they have the second highest cap space in the NFL if they're able to get a deal done with Jonah Williams. I want this to happen so bad. Realistically, though, I don't think it'll happen, but I'm all for Jonah Williams leaving Cincinnati. I absolutely hope he's not on this team this upcoming season.
Yeah, I don't think the Bengals will, as you kind of hinted at, will take anything less than a day 2 pick. I think the way the Bengals will look at it, for one, as you said, they're not used to trading their own players. They'll only do it if they see like a obvious opportunity that advantages them over the other team. So I think they're going to see it as Jonah can't decide that he's staying at left tackle. He can say that, but if the Bengals don't trade him, he's getting stuck at right tackle, whether if he likes it or not. And I don't think Jonah would be toxic or cancer about it, or whatever word you want to say about it. I think he would get to that position, not create something bad. But at the same time, the Bengals are thinking, okay, we're just going to get more value out of Jonah Williams than we are for a 5th or a 4th round pick. I think that's the way the Bengals are looking at it. And yeah, him going public, he's really been public about this since the Bengals drafted him, about him being at left tackle. And I completely agree that does not help his trade value. But where this could have potentially advantaged the Bengals is the first wave of offensive tackle prospects in the draft is really good. But after that first wave, there is a significant drop-off. So that we could maybe see a trade on draft day where a team in the first round misses out on an offensive tackle. they may not have great option. They may not like who's there. So they just may be like, you know what, we can't have this guy at right tackle. There's nobody we have in the draft. We need this to happen now. So you could get a team who's perhaps a little too patient and then kind of freak out. As we keep mentioning, the Bengals just aren't going to do something to do it. They're going to let it come to them. They're going to wait until they see something they like. So, yeah, I completely agree. It's going to be a day 2 pick. It's not going to be a day 3 pick unless if it's maybe an early 4th round pick. Even then, I think that's a bit far fetched. The Bengals still well, I don't know if like's the right word. They still think Jonah can be a valuable starter. And so they're going to not be giving him off for pennies. Like we keep saying, they're going to have their own demand for him, and that might be one not a lot of teams are looking for. But the nice thing in a league of 32 teams, it just takes one team to get over zealous or just over panicking or whatever word you want to use. So there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages to the Bengals in this situation. And it's really hard to predict what's going to happen next because there's so many ups and so many downs. And also Jonah's injury history is also something to remember when talking about this trade. So yeah, honestly, I have no prediction of what will happen. I know Ian Rappaport on the Pat McAfee show said it could happen soon. If I had to guess, it would be during draft weekend, probably day of round 2, because obviously round 1 isn't happening. But this is what makes offseason so frustrating. We don't know if or when Jonah Williams is going to be traded, and that also leaves the Bengals with question marks at that offensive tackle spot as well.
But it's one of those situations, like we're saying, when you look at the Bengals, they don't trade their players very often, and they're not trading. I would not imagine they're going to trade a day 3 pick, trade Jonah Williams for a day 3 pick, because Williams playing at right tackle, depending how long that would be, that's still going to be more valuable than that day 3 pick as of right now. But when you look at Will Lewis here, or you could be a conditional pick for a 2024 draft, where the round depends on how many snaps he takes, like a 4th, they become a 3rd based on percentage snaps. That's something interesting as well I was going to bring up. We're talking about the Bengals don't trade players. The Bengals overvalue their players at times. When you look at the Bengals, let's say 2020, 2019, when the Bengals, in 2019, 2018, we were kind of in the rebuild stage, they would have been better off trading guys like Dalton, Green, Atkins, Dunlap, these guys. I know Bengal fans did not want it to happen, but you would have acquired draft picks much more around that time frame than the years following that. I know we traded. I know I said that we traded Dunlap for basically nothing, but we could have got so much in return. But the Bengals overvalued the players because there was rumors during the 2018 or 19 season that Dalton. There was talks about teams wanting a 2nd or 3rd round pick for him. The Bengals should have been all over that because around that time you'd have to realize Dalton was not going to be the plans a quarterback for Cincinnati. Look at John Ross's final season with the Bengals. The Bengals decided to keep John Ross instead of trading him, and keep John Ross in hopes of getting a compensatory pick for him. They did not get a compensatory pick for him. They didn't play him at all. That situation just made no sense to me. You could have got something. Instead, you took a risk and a gamble, and you got absolutely nothing because you overvalued your players. And I just feel like this is another situation. Honestly, even if the Bengals got offered a 3rd round pick, I don't know if I could 100% confidently say that the Bengals would accept that trade. If I'm the Bengals, I totally would. The Bengals have to be the clear winners of trades, or they're not willing to do it. When you traded Billy Price to get B.J. Hill, Billy Price was a bust. He did not live up to the hype at all. He only had 1 year left in this deal. B.J. Hill, he played with the Giants, I think, when Lou Anarumo was back on the Giants as well. So there was a connection there. The Bengals won that trade because there was still potential in B.J. Hill, and he's been really good for us. So when you look at the Bengals, when they've done trades, they have to be the clear winners of it. They have to be the more advantaged team with the trades. They have to be the winners of it, or they're not really going to do it. I hope we trade Williams. I don't think we will, but this is another situation where I definitely think the Bengals could overvalue a player. They don't make a trade, and that player, you don't make that trade, and they could have been better off trading that player to get a draft pick.
Yeah, Absolutely. So we'll see if the Bengals front office has learned from its past. Just a few minutes ago, we were complimenting them about the market in Orlando Brown, but now this is something completely different. So we're going to have to see if they've learned from their past mistakes. Hopefully, with it being more the Taylor era now, we talked about 2018, that was Marvin's last year, in 2019, the transition year. So hopefully, with the Bengals having more established coaches, the front office growing and showing a lot of improvement since then, hopefully they have learned from their mistakes and will make that trade and not reject a third round pick. If they only get offered day 3 picks and reject those, I'm not mad at them. I completely understand why they would do that. But if they reject day 2 picks, then that would be very frustrating.
It's something that is definitely possible for Cincinnati to do, and it's just so aggravating because Jonah Williams has been a bust so far, and Orlando Brown comes in, the intention he's going to play right tackle. He takes the easy way out and asks for a trade, not even pretty much attempting, not even going to attempt to, left tackle, I was bad there, but I can make up for it and improve playing right tackle. He just takes the easy way out and asks for a trade. Really stupid move by Jonah Williams there, but it's going to be interesting to see what plays out with Jonah Williams in Cincinnati. But like you said earlier, if he's not traded, he's going to play right tackle until Leo Collins comes back, whether he likes it or not. When you look at Mixon, it's weird because, like I said, before free agency, I wasn't against releasing him, but at this point now, I just don't really think it'd be smart because it would be kind of dumb because you can't rely on a guy who's not even on your team yet to be your running back 1 heading into the season. If you had P. Ryan, I feel like you kind of have a little bit more confidence in it, even though P. Ryan I don't feel like he's a running back number 1 on the team who's contending for a Super Bowl. P. Ryan played good for us this past season. I mean, he had over 100 rushing yards against the Chiefs back in December, but I just don't get releasing Mixon at this point because the absence of P. Ryan. You had the top running back like Robinson or a guy like Gibbs from Alabama, and if you had P. Ryan, maybe I can understand it, but if you were to release Mixon, that first-round pick, if Robinson or Gibbs is there, you're probably going to have to take him. And to me, I didn't really like that because that's not necessarily best player available. I'm always best player available type of deal. So when you look at that, I just feel like there'd be more negatives to releasing Mixon than there is positives. It's really risky, and we could be in another position, a situation where there's another position now that the Bengals really need an upgrade and a need. We already are kind of at tight end. We could still use help and safety. Then if you release Mixon and you're specifically finding your running back in the draft, I just don't feel like that's a good idea because you're going to end up fixating on a position or a player and draft a guy who maybe should have been picked maybe 20 picks after that, something like that. I mean, we fixated on positions several times. I mean, look at Jackson Carman. That pick was freaking terrible. I mean, I don't even really want to get into Billy Price. I hated that pick. It was such a freaking reach. Like, just made no sense because right now, was the pick before, we could have traded back 10, 15 spots, got Billy Price and a third-round pick, but, we didn't. I'm going off about a rant from a draft that happened 5 years ago. But it's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, the Bengals fixating players in the draft, I don't want that to really happen by drafting a running back if Mixon is released in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, really from the 2016 draft to the 2019 draft, it has been, in my opinion, more negatives than positives. I mean, look at Zach Taylor's first draft, 2019. Good Lord, that draft was terrible. You have Jermaine Pratt, which was an amazing pick, but what else? You took Jonah Williams, took Drew freaking Sample in the second round. Like, that was a horrible pick then. Worst pick of the draft as soon as he was drafted, and it's even a worse pick now. It's easy. Drew Sample's also a free agent. We didn't even mention him when talking about tight ends because he's just so forgettable. You draft a blocking tight end in the second round, and with all the data suggesting that there's really no room for improvement, like his RAS wasn't all that high, his production wasn't even great. So, I mean, that's just one of the worst Bengals draft picks in history, if you ask me. So, yeah, you get Jermaine Pratt, then other than that, that pick is atrocious. Like you said, 2018, Billy Price. 2017, John Ross. And then obviously I'm glad we have Burrow, but John Ross over Mahomes, no matter what, at that time, that's a absolutely horrendous pick. Then 2016, William Jackson was an okay player for the Bengals, had a first really good few years, but then he just went downhill so quick. So really, the Bengals drafting well really started in 2020, and it's been a bit of a rough spot. And while I've gained more confidence for the Bengals when it comes to draft, there's an old saying that goes, sign needs, draft talent. You just can't rely on covering team needs in the draft. For example, if both Michael Mayer and Robinson are there at pick 28, let's say you don't want to be taking Robinson because you just failed to sign a running back. You should be wanting to take Mayer there because he's based on, when you consider player value and positional value, Mayer is the better pick there. So, but you don't want the Bengals feeling like they have to take a running back because they messed up in the earlier part of the offseason. So that's why I think they will make those signings. But yeah, you just can't count on covering needs, as you said, for players you don't even know if or will be on the team. And even if you do draft them, they could just be a complete bust. You never know. They may be confident they won't, but we've seen crazy stuff happen. For example, Jackson Carman, like you said, they were so high on him, then that just turned into a disaster. So just, yeah, relying on the draft to cover needs is just something really scary and something that, as you said, draft talent, best player available. That's what the Bengals should be focusing on. So they just need to put themselves in a position before the draft to make sure they can just draft what best player may be available and not reach for need.
100%. And, I've seen so many people say, when you look at mock drafts, in the first round, well, DeJuan Jones from Ohio State, lots of people like him. But I know you're a Ohio State fan, but when you look at players, when Bengal fans fixate on, it seems like there's at least one Ohio State player every single year that Bengal fans fixate on just because they played at Ohio State. I mean, there was people who weren't freaking Chase Young or Burrow with the first pick. Like, it's ridiculous. But DeJuan Jones is a great player, but if there's a situation, DeJuan Jones or Jackson Smith and Najigba, if he's at 28, that's not even a debate to me. I know Bengal fans will say, oh, well, you need the offensive line, you need to protect Burrow. I don't care. Best player available. Like you said, you signed needs. You signed Orlando Brown. That's something else I think about the Orlando Brown signing is because that takes away the Bengals developing a left tackle. The Bengals cannot develop an offensive lineman to save their freaking life. They might draft DeJuan Jones at 28. They might draft another lineman at 28. But the way the track record has been for Cincinnati really since 2017, 18, around that time frame, really since Whitworth left, they have not developed an lineman to save their life. They're just not good. They haven't developed one who's been even average. So to me, I'm still on the best player available type of deal, and especially just like if you were to release Mixon, it's so risky. You cannot fixate on a player because the Bengals fixated on Sample. They fixated on Carman. They could have, with trading back with Sample, they could have got him like 2 picks late or 2 rounds later, and they still would have got him. It just made no sense. Like I hated that pick, and I do not want that to happen to the Bengals this year because one screw up with a pick could. I'm not trying to overreact, but one screw up and a mess up, major, mess up with the Bengals in the draft could really, hurt their future and hurt them this year, depending on what you end up doing. Like, you don't want to take a guy who, is a position need over a guy who was 100% without a doubt the best player available. Like, you don't want to reach on a safety if a guy like Jordan Addison's there. I don't care if we have Chase, Boyd, and Higgins. You take Jordan Addison because he's the best player available. Boyd only has 1 year left in this deal. Higgins has 1, but it's really 2 because, if they're not going to get a deal done, he's going to be franchise tag. But still, like, you want to make this team as good as you possibly can. And that's not always the case by drafting a position that you're weak at. You can make a team better by getting the best players available. And that's a reason why the Patriots were so good for as long as what they were. They didn't draft team needs. They got the best player available no matter what. They already had a good running back. Oh, but that running back in the first round, he's by far the best player on the board. Let's take him and get our team better and better and better. That's something that really the Bengals should do, and really all NFL teams should do. I just don't understand why teams don't do it more than what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And like as we talked about, the Bengals just can't just be specifically fixated on those players. Like you said, if they waited a few rounds, Drew Sample's probably there. If the Bengals probably could have waited another round for Carmen. They drafted Carmen over so many better offensive linemen. It's hard to not be frustrated. And when we talk about developing offensive linemen and the fail of, I should say, I think at some point we need to kind of, I don't want to say blame, but kind of mention Frank Pollock. You know, he was here for Marvin's last year, then came back a few years into the Zach Taylor era. Like, Frank Pollock was a Billy Price guy. He banged his fist on the table for him. Really nothing. Jonah Williams, he wasn't drafted by Pollock. He was drafted by the old offensive line coach. His name's blanking. Sorry.
Paul Alexander?
No. That was it's the
Jim Turner.
Yes, Turner. Yes, and he obviously Jonah started with him, but he's shown no improvement under Pollock. Carmen's shown no improvement under Pollock. And Pollock's not a wizard, but you think Williams, somebody who has the tools, who played at a high level in college, could be coached to be at least an average lineman in the NFL. He seemed to get worse throughout his time. He's that inconsistent. So it's just at some point we need to keep an eye on Pollock, and the Bengals keep drafting day 1 and 2 offensive linemen. They just continuously to fail. At some point, Frank Pollock needs to be under the scope and held responsible.
And when you look at the Bengals, it's one of those situations where you want to draft a lineman if it can't help your team, and if he's the best in the board, that's fine. But it's interesting because you don't want to not draft a lineman because your offense linemen have sucked, because eventually you're going to get a good one. And that's just kind of a bad philosophy to not draft one just because you haven't had a good one in a while. But, I mean, the track record shows the Bengals cannot develop an offense lineman at all. Like DeJuan Jones, or if you draft a guy in round 1, if he plays right tackle, are you going to have him play until Collins comes back and then have Collins, take over? Or if you're going to have that offense lineman play right away, then release Collins, to me, I think that's entirely too risky. But it's also so freaking risky because if DeJuan Jones is at pick 28, he starts at right tackle. The bye week, let's say it's around 8 or 9, Collins comes back. That is such a freaking confidence killer for a rookie. That's hard to get back. I mean, look at John Ross's rookie year. People don't talk about it much, but John Ross was a bust. But, I mean, early on, that was a confidence killer, when he was getting benched and not playing it, and that's hard to regroup from. You don't want to have a similar situation like that with an offense lineman that you picked your first-round pick on, your most valuable pick in the draft on, get a confidence killer, and then let's say the following offseason you cut Collins or whatever, and then that rookie, Jones or whoever it is at 28, it fails to get his confidence back and then sucks like John Ross. There's good things about drafting a lineman, but there are more bad things. I really feel like people realize if you draft a lineman at 28.
Yeah, no matter what, there's not really an ideal situation for the Bengals. You could, trade, like you said, trade away Jonah, start the rookie, then he gets benched. That doesn't end well. You could just cut Collins start the season and completely rely on the tackle. History tells us for the Bengals that is not the best move, as you mentioned. So it just seems like you could draft him, put him on the bench. You're like, hey, we really like you. We're in a bit of a unique situation here with Collins. So if we're going to keep you on the bench now, if there's an injury, we'll put you in. But for now, just because of the situation, you're on the bench. That probably doesn't bode well for the rookie. So there's just a situation where it's just not ideal. They could cut Collins now, trade Jonah. But as we said, just relying on that rookie is so risky. And as history has told us, for the Bengals, that is not something you want to do.
And, we kind of talked about this towards the beginning of the video, but when you look at Jonah Williams, realistically, unless it's a day 2 pick, I don't think he's getting traded. If he's on the Bengals, he's playing right tackle, whether he likes it or not. And I feel like having Williams play right tackle, he is such a left tackle. I don't feel like him switching positions, I don't feel like would be great. But there's no way he could be worse at right tackle than he's been at left tackle. I mean, giving up 23 sacks the last 2 seasons. But Jonah Williams at right tackle, if he plays good, Collins comes back, then maybe you can trade him if he plays decent. A team might need a right tackle towards the trade deadline, a team who might be in playoff contention. But, I mean, that's kind of the bad thing about drafting a lineman in round 1, because if Williams isn't trading, he's going to be a right tackle. If you draft a right tackle, if you have Jonah Williams, and if you have Collins coming back from injury, there is no possible way you could have that 100% success for the Bengals, because, I mean, the rookie will basically set the whole year because Williams will play. He might get traded, then Collins comes back. Or if he plays great, it would just play out. Like, you don't know what's going to happen at right tackle. Everybody's talking about tight end, safety, running back, like we've kind of mentioned. But right tackle, it's a situation where the Bengals just make one wrong move. It could really set them up for failure. And it's going to be really interesting to see for the draft. And I feel like that's another reason why I'm not fixating on the right tackle at all in the draft. I'm not 100% against it, but I'm more against it than I am for sure.
Yeah, I'm at a point where wouldn't hate it, wouldn't love it. It just really depends what prospect it is. Like, if it is Jones, but there's some really good freaking players we took over because he was an offensive tackle, then I'm not going to mind the pick, or I would not like that pick. But if he was just truly we see him as the best player, he happens to be in our long-term plans and needs, then okay, yeah, that's the draft. That's what you have to do sometimes. But the Bengals can't be fixating on right tackle. They can't be fixating on tight end, running back. What you name the position, they can't be fixating on it. The only proper time it is to fixate on a position is when you have the number 1 pick in the draft and you desperately need a quarterback, and there's an amazing quarterback right there for you. That's the only time you should be fixating. Like, we kind of made a joke about it earlier with, like, the Ohio State fans. There's always that one prospect, which I definitely agree with. Even as an Ohio State fan, I'm like, which is sometimes kind of funny as well, because since, like, I'm somebody who likes to really get into it, I see people hyping them up, and I'm just like confused, or shouldn't say confused, I expect it, but it's just kind of funny and sometimes a little hurtful. Be like, yeah, I really like this guy. I root for him the whole year, but he's a terrible pick here. That's just kind of funny, but there's just I just lost what I was, never mind. But like you kind of made example of Jackson Smith and Jigba. Yeah, he is such a good pick at 28. Yeah, he may not be the short need, but you put Tyler Boyd, as you mentioned, not too long on his contract. Smith and Jigba, he fights real nicely in that slot. Now, him being there at 28, probably a long way, or probably far-fetched from happening, but, just as we said, the Patriots are so good because they draft best player available. And just we have to see that from the Bengals. They just can't fixate on anything. I think that's where a lot of teams make mistakes in the draft. We've certainly seen the Bengals make that mistake. So they just need to keep an open mind, because while they may not have the world's most needs, they also don't have the world's best depth. So really, either way, if they just play it smart, if they just, like we keep saying, draft best player available, it should be okay. And long term, that will be setting the team up very nicely. So as we just kind of keep saying, this one mistake from the Bengals in this draft, that could have a really bad long-term effect, especially if it is that offensive tackle position. So the Bengals need to be 100% confident and do all the research to avoid any mistakes with the first few rounds of the draft.
And something I hate is, like, the Bengals need to improve their offensive line, all that crap. Like, Orlando Brown signing was huge. Like, obviously, it was one of the biggest free agency signings the Bengals have ever had. Arguably the biggest, signing they've had when it comes to, top-tier free agent. But when you look at the Bengals, I mentioned earlier, their offensive line in the second half of the year was good. It was not talked about enough. They played very, very good. And when you look at the Bengals, it's like you have Orlando Brown, you have your starters coming back. I don't know why you need to fixate on an offensive lineman. Like, this offensive line was good. Burrow wasn't getting sacked a ton towards the end of the season. People only love to point out when Burrow gets sacked a lot. People love to talk about the Steelers game, the Cowboys game, and the Chiefs game in the playoffs, in the Ravens game in the playoffs, because those were the games he got sacked the most. But when you look at this offensive line, isn't bad. I just feel like fixating on an offensive line prospect will not be smart. I just don't get this idea where it's coming from, that this Bengals offensive line sucks. It's not great by any means. It's not terrible by any means. I would say that towards the end of the season, it was good. Like, it's much better than people think. You add Linda Brown in that mix, it's going to be even better. I don't feel like you need to kind of stop with the offensive lineman talk at 28, unless it's a clear-cut best guy. But it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out with the Bengals. I just hope that they make the smartest decision, best player available. They don't screw it up like Drew Sample, Billy Price, all these top picks that they had before. Track record shows the Bengals are either going to get a home run or they're going to have a complete strikeout. There's no really in between.